Hi, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed your break and are coming back rested and excited for the rest of this Saturday of winter conference. Before I hand it over to our keynote, just a couple things. So after this session, we're going to go into our strategy sessions. And as a reminder, these strategy sessions are going to be a great opportunity for you to connect with other members from YDSA chapters. These are going to be facilitated discussions. And so I'm going to ask again that you just register for one of them and bring, 100% to these sessions, turn on your camera, get excited to connect with other students. And just really, participate in these discussions because it's going to be, like I said, one of our best opportunities this weekend to connect across chapters. I think that's it for me right now. I'm going to hand it over to Sin from UC Berkeley YDSA for a quick message.
Hi, comrades. Hope you're having a great conference. My name's Sin. I'm a second year at UC Berkeley, where I serve as the co-chair of our campus's YDSA chapter. I'm also a sitting member of YDSA's National Labor Committee and a proud rank and file member of UAW 2865. First off, just want to say it's so great to be here with you all this weekend. It's really easy to forget what it means to be part of a national socialist organization when you're preoccupied with the day-to-day work of maintaining your individual chapters and whatnot. And so to be able to meet so many great organizers this weekend, to be able to take the lessons we've learned back to our chapters and to collectively decide the way forward for our burgeoning socialist movement is an invaluable opportunity, in my opinion. That being said, amazing conferences like this one, let alone amazing organizations like this one, take a lot of time and resources to build. As many of you already know, DSA is an entirely member-funded organization, which means that contributions from members like you and I support all of our work, ranging from seemingly trivial things like having our own conference platform and Zoom lines to campaigns with as many moving parts as DSA for Bernie. As much as we may wish otherwise, an effective, politically independent organization requires its own source of funding. Other organizations get to rely on grants and huge contributions from wealthy donors, but as socialists who want to end the owning class and their practice of corporate philanthropy, we don't have that luxury and we don't want it. That kind of pay-to-play system is exactly what we reject. We don't want to be beholden capitalists. We don't want people telling us what to do, how to organize, which forms of protest are legitimate and which ones aren't. And that's why YDSA and I want to make the ask of at least 100 of you, that's our goal for the weekend, but I know we can hit more, to either become a dues-paying member of YDSA today or to renew and even up your dues if you can. Dues for YDSAers are only $20 a year. That's less than the price of one coffee a month. But if needed, there's also a dues waiver on our join page that you can fill out. It'd be kind of ironic if our organization turned people away because of inability to pay. That's absolutely not what we're about. We care about your money insofar as it allows us to do good work and to beat the boss. And so if you can cheers to that, if you want to beat the boss, I encourage you to either begin paying or upping your dues today. And if that's not compelling enough, joining or renewing as a member this weekend will automatically enter you into a raffle to win a YDSA sweatshirt at the end of the conference. So if not for advancing the cause of socialism, you should at least do it for the fit. But for me, at least, I believe that the only way we can get it done is by building a mass, democratically run socialist organization that is of and for the working class. And so personally, I'm going to increase my dues to $10 a month right after this, and you should join me. Link is in the chat. That's all I got. Have a great rest of your WinterCon, comrades. And now I'll pass it off to Oren, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sin, for that. Everybody should pay dues. It's really important. So hi, everyone. My name is Oren. I'm a second year at Yale, and I'm co-chair of Yale YDSA, and I also serve alongside Sin on the National Labor Committee. So without further ado, I will introduce our guest speaker today. So Assembly Member Zoran Kwame Mamdani is a New York City DSA member and a New York State Assembly member for New York's 36th Assembly District, representing Queens neighborhoods Astoria, Ditmar, Steinway, and Astoria Heights. Zoran was born and raised in Kampala, Uganda, and moved with his family to New York City at the age of 7. As an undergrad at Bowdoin College, Zoran co-founded his college's first Students for Justice in Palestine chapter, and later organized across the country with different progressive organizations seeking to win national elections as well as expand healthcare coverage. Before running for office, Zoran worked as a foreclosure prevention housing counselor, helping low-income homeowners of color across Queens fight off eviction and stay in their homes. In 2020, with the backing of New York City DSA, he challenged an incumbent Democratic Assembly member running as a proud socialist on the New York City DSA for the many slate for state government. Zoran, along with his slate mates, swept their elections, increasing the number of socialist electeds in Albany from 1 to 5. As an assembly member, Zoran fights every day for a future where each and every New Yorker lives a dignified life and where the distribution of that dignity is not determined by the market. At a time when almost a quarter of his neighbors across Astoria spend half their income on rent, when they breathe the most polluted air in Queens, and when they are profiled at the highest rates of any neighborhood in the borough, Zoran believes that the future we deserve is one where housing, energy, and justice are for the many, not the few. Zoran is also proud to be the first South Asian man to serve in the New York State Assembly, as well as the first Ugandan and only the third Muslim to ever be a member of the body. For too long, communities such as these have been left out of New York State politics and priorities. In his work, Zoran seeks to amplify the voices of the unheard across both the district and state, and will continue to do so for as long as he remains in office. So I'm now going to hand it over to Zoran. Thank you so much for talking with us today.
You are so welcome. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for having me. My name is Zoran Kwame-Mamdani. I'm a first year at the New York State Assembly. I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes, then I'm going to hand it over to Oren and all of you to ask any questions that you may have, because I think that what you're looking to find out is far more interesting than what I'm looking to impart. But there were two things that I wanted to say just to kick us off. The first is that I'm especially excited to be speaking to you at, YDSA members across the country, because my journey, as Oren alluded to and referred to, in organizing began at my college campus with Students for Justice in Palestine. And although the work that I do now is not every single day relating to that very same struggle, while that struggle is critically important to me, but I'm now dealing with issues of housing right here in Astoria, as well as the issues of MTA and so on and so forth, the lesson that experience taught me is one that informs every single aspect of my organizing, and that is how to relate to power. And what I would say is, for me at Bowdoin College, it was a hard lesson to come to, which was that you should always relate to power with a healthy dose of skepticism. And I say that because in our personal experience at the college, we had a president who was very well liked and who used all the right words. And to convince everyone that we should not privilege rhetoric over reality, that we should not have an understanding that is given to us and fed to us by the establishment of our school, no matter how much they may be liked, is an understanding that really informs and continues to inform the organizing that I do on a daily basis, where we have to make it very clear that people cannot eat words. People need to have actual food. People need to have actual houses to live in. People need to have actual schools that they can go to. And I think it's so critical that this journey into understanding the way in which we should relate to power, this journey in understanding that it is socialism that we are fighting for, is a journey that should begin as soon as possible for every single person in this country and in this world. And it is so exciting to see the work that you all do across campuses across this country. Both in terms of the political education that you're able to impart, as well as the organizing that you're doing to change the material conditions at your individual colleges. So I wanted to just highlight that and thank all of you for all of that. And the second thing I wanted to just make sure to discuss before passing it over to Oren is that we're in a very interesting moment right now. I'm only 29 years old, so I can't say that I've lived through enough history, but I can say that from my lifetime, it does feel as if the left is in a more ascendant position than we have been in recent years. And what I wanted to make sure to say is that when our position starts to change, when we start to accumulate power, when we start to elect individuals such as myself and my other slate mates into local office, we are started to be treated in a different way than we used to be. And the way in which power engages us now, it is very critical for all of us to remember what it is that we are fighting for, and to remember that our agenda is an agenda that must not be dictated by calculus, but by conviction. And what I mean by that is that the many things that we believe, some of them are already popular in this moment right now, right? If we're talking about the cancellation of student debt, if we're talking about Medicare for all, these are issues which have the groundswell of popular support across this country. But then there are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS, right? Or whether it is the end goal of ceasing the means of production, where we do not have the same level of support at this very moment. And what I want to say is that it is critical that in the way that we organize, the way that we set up our work and our priorities, that we do not leave any one issue for the other, that we do not meet a moment and only look at what people are ready for, but that we are doing both of these things in tandem, because it is critical for us to both meet people where they're at and to also organize for what is correct and for what is right, and to ensure that over time we can bring people to that issue. And that is the crux of the reason why I joined DSA in the first place, is because as someone who came up through the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, I knew of a term, and many of us do, called PEP, Progressive Accept Palestine. And I would see time and time again different organizations that would have a belief in so many of the values that I held, but then would draw a line in Palestine. They would not want it to be applicable to the fight for justice and solidarity in Palestine. And the reason that I joined DSA, if I had to pick one, was because there was no exception for Palestine. Was because the same fight and the same struggle was understood to be a universal one. And this was an organization that not only understood that, but sought to lift up what was going on in Palestine by endorsing BDS. And so I'm in this organization because we didn't just pick and choose the battles that everyone was ready for in this very moment, but because we picked and chose the battles that were right and that are extensions of the values that we have as socialists. And so what I would say is, as we gain more and more power, which I am confident that we will, we must ensure that we do not leave any one issue behind because it might not be popular in this one moment. And that extends to Palestine, that extends to so many different things. And so I just wanted to say that before passing it over to Oren for some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Zoran, for that talk. So now we're going to go into Q&A. I believe that Michael texted in the chat, but if you write a question in the chat, Nia will text them to me because I can't see the Cadence chat right now. So we have our first question for Zoran, which is, how should DSA endorsed electeds relate to their DSA chapter once in office?
I think that's a great question. I think DSA electeds, we have to ensure that we are operating as a unit and that we are not separated from one another. Now, here in New York City, we have now six elected officials as part of a group called Socialists in Office. And it's an interesting thing because at this moment, I don't have, I have many Signal chats, as I'm sure many of you do. One is with the electoral working group of my local branch, Queens. We meet once every 2 weeks. Another is with the heads of priority campaigns and the co-chairs of DSA and various citywide DSA leaders, and then all the Socialists in Office and the staff is part of that. And that chat comes with a weekly call, an hour-and-a-half call, where we all ensure that we're on the same page and are organizing and strategizing as a unit. I think it's critical that when we elect anyone into office, we do not then think that the work is done. That's the beginning of the work. And it's the beginning of the work not only in the sense of being able to assist that person, because being in office can be a very lonely and isolating experience. I'm very lucky in that I have 5 other DSA endorsed comrades who are with me in the Assembly and in the State Senate. But for example, before we were elected, Julia Salazar was in office for 2 years without a single other socialist endorsed by DSA. And we have to be prepared that across the country, we will have moments such as that where people go in alone. And so it's not only isolating, but it's also important to understand that the reason we are in this position is not because no one has been as special as us individual elected officials and that we are the first to ever be elected in these moments. It's because the way that power is set up, the way that these institutions are set up, they're set up to corrupt you. They incentivize you compromising your positions. And no one individual can stop that. What will stop that is a mass movement. What will stop that is an organization like DSA, right? Any organization that is committed to this kind of struggle and continues to organize. And so what I mean by that is that when somebody gets elected to office, we have to continue to do active organizing where they are a part of that. So while I do not have, I think there are some things which are kind of for optics of like, oh, you need to show up to your branch to say something for 2-3 minutes. I think that's important, but I think we need much more than that, which is active organizing and working together in unison, and to create an apparatus that figures out a plan of how to organize internally within these institutions, which is what I'm so excited about the fact, which is that we're doing it.
Awesome. So our next question is, How can we use elections strategically to build class consciousness?
I think that, we have to first and foremost ensure that we are putting our weight behind candidates who firmly believe in what our organization stands for. We cannot be endorsing candidates who are interested in the support that DSA provides, but not the ideology that it is built for. And when we ensure that we have candidates that fit that understanding, it then makes it much easier to run a campaign that will be built around raising class consciousness, because we will run the campaign challenging the current status quo and showcasing it through our critique how this is an issue of capitalism. And it's what is very difficult is that you need to trust people to take that forward. And it's hard because now we're at a moment where we do not have a deep enough bench where we can always be bringing in internal candidates, right? For myself, I was a part of DSA for a couple of years prior to running for office. I was in the organizing committee of the Queen's Electoral Working Group. And so I'm coming in internally. But for many of our campaigns, we're recruiting people from outside of the organization. And that is well and good as long as there's that understanding. And it's just very critical through the endorsement process to make it very clear what the purpose is about this entire project. It's not simply to raise class consciousness, but to win socialism. And obviously raising class consciousness is a critical part of that. But making sure that we have candidates that both understand that and are willing to put that forward at every which moment that they have, at every which opportunity that they're given, so that we are not wasting the bully pulpit that these positions come with.
Awesome. Yeah. So our next question is actually one that I think you have quite a bit of familiarity with, which is, how should DSA candidates running for office show that they are different from other vaguely progressive candidates?
Yeah, I have personal experience with this one. It's difficult because a lot of people use the term progressive, and it's a catch-all term. If you haven't checked it out, Michael Hollingsworth, who's a DSA-endorsed city council candidate in Brooklyn, recently gave an interview to Interview Magazine where he talks about this very issue, which is that this term has begun to lose meaning because of how often it's being used and how little accountability there is for the use of it. So I ran against somebody who identified as progressive, and what was very important for us was to showcase the ways in which that term, and frankly, politicians who use that term, have fallen short. And for us, some of the critical points in which we highlighted that were money, right? How much money are these politicians raising and from whom? And what votes has that money, what stances has that money led them to take or not to take? And there were other, for me, it's easy, like, somebody will identify as a progressive, ask them what they think about Palestine. It'll be very quick to understand whether or not they're a socialist. And so, I may be the first candidate in New York City politics to attack attack is such a ridiculous word, but just critique my opponent on the issue of the Nakba and on the issue of Palestinian rights, and making it clear time and time again that when I talk about issues, when I talk about values, when we talk about values, they are universal. And they are not simply convenient. We do not espouse them only when the math looks good. We espouse them at every single opportunity. And so thinking about, okay, where are the places in which politicians have been unwilling to go because they think it's not actually a viable place? Going into those issues and making it clear that your stance is not affected by the way in which people perceive those things, it shows people the truth of your ideology and the truth of your politics. So I would encourage you to do that.
So our next question actually comes from not the live chat, but from the feed earlier today in Cadence. And someone asked, what was the ground game for getting people to vote for a socialist candidate?
I think that, that's the thing that we also have to be honest about why we win. And it's not just that we are, as I was talking about earlier, some of, a lot of what we believe in is very popular. Some of it, we still have to do work to make it popular. So we cannot be simplistic enough to say that we won simply because I'm a socialist. We also won because we ran the best campaign that we could have run. And that's also what separates our organization here in New York City from a lot of other organizations in New York City, which is that we are the only mass only mass membership organization that actually has rank and file members that will come out at the masses that we do and knock on doors and petition and chalk and do every different thing to make sure that we meet the voters of our district wherever they may be. And so the ground game for us, right, we started the campaign before COVID. So there was door-to-door canvassing, right? But then COVID happened and the ground game transformed into phone banking. It also, this isn't typically considered ground game, but we took our office, 2,000 square feet, which we were using as like a community hub to launch our canvases and train our members and all these kinds of things, and made it into a mutual aid hub. And we distributed we raised over $65,000 for food distribution during the month of Ramadan and beyond, and distributed, I think, over 13,000 meals and over 1,000 groceries to our neighbors. And we basically, in every which way, tried to live our values. In additional things that are not innately socialist, but are just very smart to do, is, we had posters everywhere. We had chalking everywhere. We had a sound car where I would go with a couple friends, and we would go in a car. Sometimes there was a sunroof, sometimes just a window. I would have a megaphone, and we would just be driving around the district, and I would just be announcing to people that, hey, the election is starting tomorrow. Tomorrow is the beginning of early voting. You have two options, and I am the only one that does not take a single dollar from police unions, from corporations, or from fossil fuel companies, right? You have the chance to elect a person of color in this district that has never happened before. You have, going through the different ways in which this election would be a break from what we have known in this neighborhood and frankly in this city. So those are some examples of a ground game, but other things would also be, handwritten postcards, basically showing that we are actual people who believe in this. We're not just, extremely well-funded companies and shell groups and super PACs. We are individuals, ordinary people in the neighborhood who will write to you and show you that, I'm not getting a political mailer, I'm getting an actual handwritten postcard from Oren. And that makes me want to read it and think about this candidate more.
Okay, cool. So as Nia said in the chat, since we only have a little over 15 minutes left, we're going to close out questions because we have a bunch. So thank you all for submitting them. So our next question is, your work with cooperative housing and your recent appearance in the Gravel Institute was so inspiring. What can we do as students to increase cooperative housing and worker-owned businesses?
Well, thank you so much for that comment. That's very nice of you and kind of you. I want to, before moving forward to answer it, I want to thank a couple people who actually helped to write that script, which is Matthew Thomas and Will Spisak, were very helpful. And Matt was the chief writer of that. What can we do to help? What can you all do? I would say the number one thing you can do is to organize. And that seems like a bit of a cop-out answer, but I really do mean it, which is that I encourage people to join DSA every single day, but there are, and what that encouragement comes out of is the belief that we actually do the work. We believe in these things, as do many others, but then when it comes down to it, we do the work that can sometimes be very, it is not the kind of work that you often take photos of and put on social media, because door knocking is very, very difficult, right? It's very important, but it's not always the most exciting and enjoyable experience. Petitioning can be hard, to wake up at 6 a.m. and go to the subway stop and try and get people to sign up. All of these different aspects of what we do are not always the easiest things, but we do them, and that's why we keep winning, is because we actually put our beliefs into practice. Now, how that relates back to the fight for housing, the fight for social housing, is that we need to take these arguments that we have for what housing needs to be and take them from the page and take them from the URL and bring them out in the person and make these the dividing lines of the argument, whether it's for electoral campaigns or it's even for fights against rezonings or whatever it may be. We have to set the terms up ourselves in an affirmative way. I personally, I'm an electoralist. I came through the electoral working group. I've worked on a number of socialist campaigns. And so I believe that there's great utility in using campaigns as a means by which to push public consciousness about certain issues, because you can, you have a natural buildup of intensity towards election day, and you can force the incumbents to respond to these issues in ways that they otherwise would not have to, because they see a consequence of losing their job. And the press and all of these other aspects of the way in which our society is set up are geared to cover these kinds of elections in a different way than if they think of them as simply intellectual debates. So I personally would say, if you're fighting for social housing, I would say that to make sure that you create a platform and then recruit candidates to espouse that very platform and then run a campaign on that platform as the fundamental differentiating point between themselves and the incumbent. Because then win or lose, and we really need to be aiming to win and not just to be in the fight. But win or lose, the conversation is now at a different place than it used to be. And so that would be my suggestion. But there's a lot of other organizing that you can do that's not electoral focused. And as many housing working groups in New York City DSA will tell you.
Yeah, Zoran, you mentioning the 6 a.m. flyering gave me flashbacks to the Kaban campaign that both Zoran and I volunteered on. On GOTV day, after I did 2 shifts and I was taking an extended break, Zoran is the person who pushed me to go and do another one. So because of the movement
you're leaving out a small part of the story, which is where you were asking me my views on some like grand socialist intellectual debate, and I just forced you to get up and get back out there.
Okay. No, I think we were being interviewed for a documentary on the campaign. All right. So the next question we have is, how do DSA legislators who have been elected but don't have many other leftist allies in their legislature build relationships and coalitions to fight for real results as we build our movement outside the legislature?
This is a great question. So there are 107 Democrats in the New York State Assembly out of 150 Assembly people. And of those 107 Democrats, there are 6 DSA endorsed electeds and 7 DSA members. We have a 7th person who's a DSA member, though she wasn't endorsed by DSA. Her name is Jessica Gonzalez Rojas. We clearly do not have the numbers as they are in this moment to win the radical legislation that we need to bring about. That doesn't mean we just sit on our hands and wait until the next electoral cycle to bring in new members and continue to change the calculus. We have to be effective right now, not just to prove to people that we're not here simply for, ideological debates, but also because our people demand results, because their lives are at stake. And so I'll give an example. We have a legislative analysis team, DSA volunteers, who look at different pieces of legislation that are coming up for a vote in committees, coming up for a vote on the floor. And they highlight their evaluation. Is this a good bill? Is this a bad bill? Is this an okay bill? And then if there are any questions. Now, the important part about the questions is that so many of these bills have not gone through any vigorous intellectual debate. And when they're presented, it's not that you're going to be one of 107 people to raise a question. Oftentimes you might be one of 5 who has a specific question about the text of the legislation. And so in this last conference that we had within our assembly of the Democratic majority, a number of us DSA electeds raised the questions that were the results of the insightful analysis of DSA rank and file volunteers, members. And now this legislation, there's a good chance of it changing to incorporate those questions into them. So that also is just a small example of how we can continue to impact what's going on right now while we continue to build power so that we can stop fighting for crumbs and start fighting for pies. And, I think of Bernie as an inspiration for this kind of approach, which is that it's very clear what his legislative views and goals are. But even while he's not able to get there or hasn't been in the past, there were, the amount of amendments that this man put through to ensure that that same vision where the working class is being fought for on a day-to-day basis that vision is having an impact and an influence on legislation that is being proposed at that time. And we have to ensure that we're doing that. Now, this is, aside from this, we have to also ensure that we do not get sucked in by power and begin to believe that these kinds of results are sufficient. We have to continue to elect more socialists, and we have to ensure that we are unapologetic about our socialism. Now, unapologetic about our socialism, when I say that, I don't mean that you're voting on an issue about, or you're saying hello to somebody and the first thing you say is, my name is Zoran and I'm a socialist. You can be smart about the conversations that you have and ensure that you're not just a one-note repetition, but you cannot hide this from people. Every single person in the assembly knows that I'm a socialist. And it's not because I'm saying it in every single breath, but because I've made it clear at enough junctures. And that's what we need to ensure, that we have candidates who are not seeking to hide this aspect of themselves, but who build their entire political agenda from this ideology and do it transparently and publicly.
Okay, great. So we have 2 more questions, and then afterwards I'm going to give a quick announcement before sending people on their way. So our next question is, what can we do to create international solidarity? Being the global hegemony that the US is, what can we do to impact the international scene, such as pushing for BDS, but that's only one example. What else can we do as students? And I'm just going to add on personally, as a local elected, what kind of work can you do as well?
Yeah, these are great questions. I think that we have to make these struggles feel real to people. We cannot make them feel like intellectual exercises. And one way to do that is, when I was at college, we had an academic boycott campaign and one of the aspects of that was to fight to stop study abroad at universities in Israel that were complicit in the occupation, many of which through the development of weapons technology for the IDF. Now, by bringing the issue of Israel, Palestine, apartheid to Bowdoin, you bring it front and center, it's harder to ignore. So I would say that is one way to build international solidarity, is to connect it to something that's actually going on in your day-to-day, so that people understand that not only is it right here, but that they also have a responsibility to act. Now, as an elected official, not just in New York State, but across this country, there is an attempt to move anti-BDS legislation through state legislatures. There have been many successes that horrific movement has had. And they will continue to try and attempt that across every single legislature. And so one thing that we can do is organize to stop that from happening. Now, that's not sufficient because that's us being on the defensive. But we also have to go forward and figure out, how is our individual state complicit with, the human rights abuses that are going on anywhere in the world? And then making sure that we move to dismantle that relationship. Those are things that you can do as a legislator, right? You can, for example, Governor Cuomo has an executive order barring, I think New York State from doing business with any company suspected of sympathizing with BDS. One thing I can do as a legislator is, once we build up a large enough coalition for this, we overturn that executive order. But more than that, in addition to our legislative powers, we also have a bully pulpit. So I organized a letter of more than 30 elected officials in New York State calling on Chuck Schumer to expand the Supreme Court. I don't have any ability to do so as a legislator through my technical parameters, but I have this platform that I can then use to try and influence the public debate about the issue and create pressure and consequence for other elected officials for whom these issues, they have the power to actually change and influence. And similarly, if you're thinking about Palestine, if you're thinking about, whatever issue it may be that is, international solidarity, you can also, as a local elected official, put together a letter to pressure your congressional delegation, to pressure your Senate delegation, to make sure that people understand that the source of pressure is not coming from the typical activist groups that they like to, erase us and describe us as, but is coming from elected officials themselves in the legislature of the state that they represent. So to basically create a sense of consequence and a sense of pressure from sources that they do not deem as, the likely individuals or institutions.
Okay, great. So now what do you see as the intersection of electoral work and labor organizing?
I think that, the intersection is, at the very least, I was just talking about the bully pulpit. You need to ensure that your solidarity with labor and labor organizing is not simply just in the tweets, right? We have to be out in the streets. And an example of that is we had the Teamsters strike. It happened in Hunts Point. And when we as elected officials show up to these strikes and stand in solidarity, it also creates a larger sense of public awareness. What we're trying to do in all of these fights is to break through into public consciousness. And our positions allow us a greater ability to do so. And so we need to use them to leverage that. Now, we can fight for unions in both while we're out there on the picket lines. We can fight through legislation. But there is also, I would just say that there is, when DSA candidates have been running in New York City politics prior to this cycle, it's been very difficult for us to get union support and union endorsements. And we often win in spite of not having any of that. And that is also something that we have to ensure that we are building those relationships, but that our relationships are not simply being built with the leadership of unions, but also rank and file members. And we have to ensure that we are, and that's what's also so exciting. Was it Sin that spoke before you, Oren? Sin was saying that they're a proud rank and file member of UAW, right? We have to ensure that our movement is not separate, or that our movement's engagement with labor is not happening only in this executive class, but it's happening at the entirety of all of our organizing. And I'm so, the reason that the DSA was able to support the Hunts Point strike in the way that we did, where we spent thousands of dollars in strike support, was because we have DSA labor branch here in New York City, right? Because we already know that the importance of labor is in the very foundation of our organization. And that is something that I would just say that we should ensure that we have that specific lens when we are setting up our chapters or we are thinking about actions. We're not simply getting our understanding of what's right and wrong from a meeting that we have that's closed doors, but that we're getting it from the experiences of people who are out there, that they themselves on strike.
Okay, awesome. So that was going to be the last question, but we have a couple more minutes. So I'm actually going to ask the actual last question, which is, what's one final piece of advice that you have for us as young socialist organizers, or multiple pieces of advice?
What is the final piece or the final piece? I would say remember why you're doing this. Remember what brought you to become a YDSA member. Because there are moments when it's fantastic. There are moments when all the work that you've done has finally come to fruition. And then there are extremely difficult moments. And what is so liberating to me is that I know every day why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's extremely difficult, the work that we all do. But I sincerely believe in this political project. I sincerely believe in socialism. And knowing what it is that brought you here, right? For me, it was Palestine that brought me into this movement. For those of you, maybe a variety of different reasons. But remembering that and remembering how this movement is unique in its ability to deliver justice for that issue is critical whenever you are doing this work. Because they will try everything to beat you down, to ensure that you do not wake up the next day to fight this same struggle, and to agree with their ludicrous statement that what we have today is sufficient. And it's important to always ground yourself in why you started this in the first place. And I used to say this to canvassers who would go out in the 4th hour of the shift, and you have to walk 10 flights, the elevator doesn't work, you have to knock on one more door, to motivate yourself to remember, why is it that I'm actually doing this? Right? Oren and I were DSA members who were organizing and canvassing for Tiffany Kavan. and for district attorney in Queens. And I would tell people that, remember that when you think you can't give another 10 minutes to knock on another door, that you're not just doing this because, it's what your friends were doing today, or you think that we have a chance to win. You're doing this because the ramifications of victory here is the difference between life and death for so many of our brothers, sisters, and family beyond the binary across this borough of Queens. It's the difference between having cash bail anymore and not. It's the difference between having sex work be decriminalized and not. And with every battle that we fight as socialists, we need to remember what the stakes are and ground ourselves in them, and why those stakes are important and critical to us as individuals. So that is a piece of advice I would give. And I also just want to say to all of you, I know I'm eating into a little extra time here, but I just want to say thank you to all of you, because it can be such a lonely experience to be a socialist, and it was for me to be one before I was a member of a mass organization. And as Sin said to start us off, it's hard to remember that we're part of a national organization sometime when we get caught up in the day-to-day. And the successes that you all have, whether they be small or big, those are successes for all of us. And so I thank you for the work that you do. I thank you for the lessons that you learn. And I thank you for your continued belief in this struggle, because know that it is going to take every single one of us to win the world that we know we deserve. And the only reason that I'm here as an elected official is because of the work of hundreds and thousands of DSA members across the city, state, and even this country. And so I thank you for continuing to believe, for continuing to work. And I thank you for being part of a movement and an organization that is going to win us that future.
Thank you so much, Saran. Thank you for grounding us. And I think that's the reason why we're all here this weekend, is because we do know the stakes and we know that this project is so important. But it's always good.
I have one more thing, Oren, if I could just say.
Go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is pay your dues. Please pay your dues in whatever way you can. Pay your dues so that we can keep going as an organization. And now I'm done.
All right, that was definitely worth it. So we're actually 2 minutes into the strategy session, so I'll make this really quick. The strategy sessions are something that's new this year. There will be a bit looser discussion that will mostly be led by the participants, with a facilitator there guiding it. And you should go to one that you think pertains to the work that you're doing or that your chapter is doing. And that will go, I believe, until 6:30. And then afterwards, we will have a break until 8. And then the optional socials will start then. If I didn't get that all, I think Anna can correct me. So please go to your strategy sessions. Your facilitators are waiting for you. Have a great night.